Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the most disturbing fact you found out about someone you know? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. So my grandmother, who has been estranged from the family for a long time now for a multitude of reasons, has this weird thing where she has to share food with people. Are you ordering steak at the restaurant? Well, oh boy, she's got to order the same thing, even if she doesn't like steak. Try her drink, it's really good. Take the first bite of chicken to let her know if it's any good. This always really annoyed me because I hate sharing food. One day I brought it up to my mom, and she was like, oh yeah, Grandma is afraid of being poisoned, so she wants other people to try it first. So let me get this straight. Grandma thinks someone is trying to poison her, so she has me try the food first? And it makes so much sense looking back because she literally would not take a bite of anything she ordered until someone else had a bite first. Thanks, Grandma. Just found out the other day that it wasn't my neighbor's dad who senselessly shot and killed my dog. It was his son, who I was close friends with. He did it on purpose. He knew how much that dog meant to me. I also found out the other day where he lives. He's a meth head now, so I'll just let nature or the police do their thing. My grandfather beat someone to death. My dad was an only child, but my grandmother was once pregnant with my dad's younger brother. When she was 6 months pregnant, someone in construction equipment ran over the car she was driving and she lost the baby. While she was in the hospital, my grandfather found the guy and beat him to death. From what I understand, he was in jail for about a week before he was released. Apparently, he claimed temporary insanity due to the circumstances. I learned all this about 4 years ago when my brother was researching family history and asked my grandfather about it. I've always seen him as a nice little old man. Graduated boot camp and wondered why my brother wouldn't talk to me. Turns out he was effing my ex while I was there instead of delivering my letters. Guess guilt ate him up, and he thought it was simpler to keep up the lie and not have a brother, right up until an old friend from my hometown told me what happened. You know, I heard a lot of ridiculously crazy stuff when I was in the military about spouses and infidelity, but you might win. That is horrible. Oof. Discovered that my sister stole my father's $25,000 Rolex not more than 24 hours after he died. I only discovered it when her and her husband made a frivolous purchase, and I wondered where they got the money since they were always broke and begging my parents for money. I got suspicious. It hit me that she might have stolen and sold the Rolex, had the paperwork, ran a track on the sales history, and discovered it had been sold to a pawn shop down the street from where my sister lives. Went to the pawn shop, and after a bit of persuasion, got them to tell me who sold it to them, and it was my sister. Me and my mom disowned her. My brother was stealing money from father who had dementia. This went on for a year, and I found out about it because the bank, who had my father's mortgage, called me wondering why it hadn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too, and when I confronted my brother about it, he said, well, I gotta pay my bills. I was about to take control of all the accounts and make sure shit got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and died shortly after that. My brother also stole some of my inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his dying father. Ex-roommate and good friend got kicked out for not paying rent. A couple of months later, a girl goes missing after her shift at Wendy's and turns up murdered. Guy confesses while on mushrooms to police and is released due to his condition when admitting it. Ran into him a couple of weeks after, and I could tell something was up. Turned himself in sober the next day. I used to go to work, leaving my girlfriend at the house with him. You think you know someone. Looking back 15 years later, and it all adds up. I said something in general about horses one time. My good friend just kind of shrugged and said, my uncle got effed to death by a horse. What the hell? Turns out my friend's uncle was the Mr. Hands guy from the Seattle area. My friend was like, oh yeah, there's a whole movie about it and everything. It's called Zoo. Some town called Umatilla, Washington, is where it happened. I did look it up to see what he was talking about, since he just blindsided me with this whole story. I don't really know why someone would claim such a thing if it weren't true, but perhaps he just wanted to shock me. We don't really communicate anymore due to changing jobs. Found out after his death that my great uncle was a grand wizard in the KKK. Opened a chest in his attic with photos from rallies, lynchings, and cross burnings all around some rural parts of Alabama. We were actually horrified by the discovery and suddenly realized why he was so negative towards his black hospice nurse, who was otherwise kind-hearted and caring with him in the family. Met a super nice guy at a networking event when I was starting out in tech. He had a ton of connections and was a nice family man, super rich. Eventually we became friends, and he was acting as a mentor figure to me in the industry. Went over to his massive new house, met his family, etc. He had the demeanor and looked like Al Borland from Home Improvement, to give you an idea. Like 4 years later, I was looking at the sex offender registry map for my local area while I was shopping for houses. Lo and behold, his house popped up. In the early 2000s, he was convicted of co-running a commercial CP sales site, served 5 years in federal prison. A work colleague appeared on the front page of a national newspaper for a life of fraudulent qualifications. He claimed medical and law degrees, was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, and was the CEO for a major health fund. He actually was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, but that and the health fund role were largely built on the fraudulent qualifications and a progression of jobs also based on these claims. In reality, the only qualification he actually held was as a mortuary assistant. Not even his wife knew. The fraudulent degrees had been gained when he was in the Army Reserves recruiting, and he had access to submitted position applications. He came undone when he applied for a government job, and some flags were raised by the recruitment people. He tried to withdraw the application, but didn't realize that an application for a government role has the same weight as a statutory declaration and cannot be withdrawn. It all went south very quickly, and he ended up doing jail time. That's pretty horrible. I also sometimes find it interesting to see the crimes that really are prosecuted to the extent of the law, and some things that you would think would be just are brushed over. What do you think about that? Figured out a few years after I married my first wife that she had an ongoing sexual relationship with her first cousin before she met me. I figured it out sitting around a campfire with the way they looked at each other. Update, due to the interest, I always knew he was her favorite cousin, but never knew or suspected anything until that night around the fire. It was just us three at that point, and I've always been great at reading people, well, except a woman I dated. Anyway, I just saw a look between them and knew without a doubt, and just asked them straight out when they first hooked up. She was so stunned, she admitted it instantly and said, "How did you know?" Then she said, "Oh God, I wonder if anyone else in the family figured it out." They slept together off and on for at least 2 years before I met her, but since that time, I suspect it was after she met me also. Another fact that was withheld before her marriage was she was bipolar and untreated. Things got back. Lucky to walk away. I divorced her in 2014. I can tell you that as of last year, I told a female cousin of hers that hates her guts, so I'm sure the family knows now, LOL. Before I answer this, I want to say that this doesn't have my permission to leave Reddit. To make sense, you have to know I have CPTSD, and with it comes severe memory loss in my case. With that being said, on to the answer. My mom sat me down at 16 and told me she walked into my grandfather molesting me at 2 weeks old. No one is sure when it stopped. I always felt off and had anxiety or depression, but as soon as she told me, she also explained it happened to her. She knew he was a monster, yet continued letting me be raised by him. I had all the symptoms growing up, including wetting the bed until I was 13. I told people growing up I knew something was wrong, and people told me I was a dramatic girl or that I was a liar. He reoffended a few years ago. That's when people started to believe me. Honestly, it's rough, and spending your whole life being invalidated invisible, and just really alone. I'm in my 30s and still am very just lost and feel completely hopeless. I'm not sure how to move on. I apologize for the ramble. I've never written out how I felt. It's weird reading it. I will probably remove this because I want to continue to stay invisible, but I saw others in the forum share their stories. My granduncle died in the year when I was born. It always got the beating around the bush treatment. He died young and suddenly. Alcohol took him. It took a visit to the graveyard with my father above the age of 30 when he finally told me the whole story. He was a medical technician. Due to a chronic issue, he lost his job, and not long after that, divorced. Got together with someone else, but he couldn't recover from the loss of his job and eventually hung himself. For long years, a severely depressed man struggles with health and family issues. With no help to come, it was sold to me as an anti-alcohol PSA, only because as a bad way of self-medicating, he spent his last worst days with heavy drinking. I don't understand the secrecy, whether if it's for a repurposed story or a family-wide shame over a true one. And knowing that depression runs deep in the family, I find it terribly harmful that such a tragedy still doesn't make sense to them, seeing the writing on the wall and admit that the problem is real. The official story is still death from alcoholism-related complications. I was pretty good friends with this guy who ran a hobbies cafe, basically a place where you could play trading card games, board games, and that sort of thing. Every Saturday, he offered a service where he'd put on Children's Day, which would usually involve watching movies on the projector, Pokemon tournaments. It was great for a lot of local parents in the area who could use the day to complete their chores with their kids out of the house, and so there were always 20 or so kids in there every week. But then a few years back, it was revealed he had approximately 1 terabyte of illicit CP on his computer. According to the news, there was no evidence he manufactured any, which gives me the slightest ray of hope that at least the kids who went there every Saturday were not exploited. But the fact he could do that was horrific. This may not be the most popular answer, but my elderly mother in another state would lie to me about her health and well-being. I always kept tabs because she was in her 80s and everything appeared to be fine until I got a call from her friend who filled me in on what was really happening. A lot of bad health stuff, it turns out. Long story short, ended up in assisted living ultimately as she needed it. I hear this happens a lot, that the elderly don't want to be put in a home, but in her case, she was literally on the verge of accidentally killing or dangerously injuring herself. So while it sucked to have to go to assisted living, if she truly wanted to live as long as possible, it was necessary. And the place was quite nice anyway. Moral of the story, if your loved ones are elderly, do more than just take their word on how they're really doing if you're able. Not so much a secret someone shared with me, but comments someone has made about a particular murder case in the Midwest US. All I'm going to say is that a family member very close to me has consistently, every so often, made comments about a particular murder that happened in the region they grew up. The murderers were caught, but I believe little to no remains were found, and through the investigation, it was discovered that the victims were fed to pigs. My family members' comments have always been vague and don't incriminate them in any way or add new information. Yet it has always unsettled me, not just because of the consistently and way in which they do it, but the hushed tone they say it in that gives me the impression they could know more than they lead on, be it first-hand or second-hand info. To be fair, rumors spread like weeds in rural America. Doesn't help that at any time of the murders, this relative of mine worked at a slaughterhouse run by another family member, another interesting character and ex-biker, and always enjoys everyone's discomfort when they go into gory detail about the process of dispatching various animals, including pigs, usually at the dinner table. Anyway, this person has always been into true crime, and I don't think many murders happen in the region they grew up, which could explain their fascination. I just can't help but shake the feeling they know something and sort of want to share it someday. Maybe I'll prod next time I see them. I mean, they might know more, But if the people were apprehended and the case is closed, I don't know what more they could offer, but, you know, it's possible, or they could just be looking for a little attention. I posted another comment, but one is about my brother. He's a psychopath, true and true. He had the best upbringing any kid could wish for. My mom and dad doted on him like he was the only thing that mattered to them. Cue my brother's birth, and he got jealous. A fun game was poking him in the eyes until he cried. He acted up so badly my parents locked him in his room, and he just spread shit all over the walls. Cue my birth. He poked me in the eyes too, but much worse. I now have glaucoma in one eye and severe damage to the surface of the other eye. My parents say, no, he only poked your older brother in the eyes, but he admitted it to my face that he did it to me more. My eye specialist says my eyes are really bad, sharp lines and cuts all over my eyes. I now have to use drops every day, and one of my eyes is pretty badly damaged. I have glaucoma in that eye due to multiple trauma incidents. I can't prove my brother did it, but I know he did, as he asked me directly if his poking my eyes caused it.